The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1883, and Hannah Zimmerman knew, before she even broke the wax seal, that her life was about to change forever. Her father stood in the doorway of their modest farmhouse outside of Denver, Colorado, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, his expression carved from stone. Hannah's fingers trembled as she unfolded the cream-colored paper, her eyes scanning the careful script that spelled out her future in neat, decisive lines. Mr. Theodore Ashford of the mining settlement near Silverton, Colorado, had agreed to the arrangement. He would expect her arrival by the end of April. The wedding would take place within a week of her arrival at his mountain estate. "Papa," Hannah whispered, looking up from the letter with wide hazel eyes, "you cannot be serious about this." Her father, Robert Zimmerman, turned his gaze to the window, watching the early spring wind bend the prairie grass. "Your mother's medical bills have taken everything, Hannah. Everything. The bank will foreclose on this land by summer if we cannot pay what we owe. Mr. Ashford is a wealthy man. He has agreed to settle all our debts in exchange for your hand in marriage. It is done." Hannah felt the walls of the small parlor closing in around her. At 21 years old, she had always imagined she would marry for love, like the heroines in the novels she borrowed from the lending library in town. She had pictured a man who would court her properly, who would make her laugh, who would look at her as though she hung the moon and stars. Instead, she was being sold like livestock to a stranger living in the isolated mountains, a man she had never met, whose only appeal was the weight of his purse. "What do you know about him?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of all his failures. "He is 42 years old. He owns 3 profitable silver mines near Silverton. He was married once before. His wife died in childbirth 5 years ago. He wants a new wife, someone young and healthy who can manage his household and give him children. He saw your photograph when I made inquiries through the marriage broker in Denver. He found you suitable. Suitable." The word tasted like ashes in Hannah's mouth. She was suitable, like a piece of furniture or a workhorse. Not cherished, not desired, just adequate for the purpose at hand. "When do I leave?" she asked, folding the letter with hands that had gone numb. 2 weeks. "I have arranged for you to travel with a freight wagon heading toward Silverton. The driver is a reputable man. He will see you safely to Mr. Ashford's property." Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She walked out of the house and into the spring sunshine, her mind reeling. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks of freedom left before she would become Mrs. Theodore Ashford, wife to a stranger, mistress of a house she had never seen, trapped in the mountains with no way back to the life she had known. The days passed in a blur of preparation. Her mother, Clara, still weak from the pneumonia that had nearly killed her that winter, helped Hannah sew new dresses for her trousseau. They worked in silence mostly, the only sound the whisper of thread through fabric and the occasional crackle of the fire. Hannah could see the guilt in her mother's eyes, the apology that never quite made it to her lips. But what good would an apology do? The arrangement was made. The money would change hands. Hannah's fate was sealed. On the morning of her departure, Hannah stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. She saw a young woman with dark blonde hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, hazel eyes that held more resignation than hope, and a face that was pretty enough but not remarkable. She wondered what Theodore Ashford had seen in her photograph that had made him choose her. She wondered if he would be disappointed when he saw her in person, tired from travel, her clothes dusty from the road. The freight wagon was loaded with supplies bound for the mining camps scattered throughout the San Juan Mountains. The driver, a gruff man named Pete Sullivan, helped Hannah climb onto the bench seat beside him. Her trunk was secured in the back among crates of canned goods, tools, and sacks of flour. Her father shook Pete's hand, pressing coins into his palm with instructions to see Hannah safely delivered. Her mother embraced her one last time, whispering, "Be brave, my darling girl. Be brave." Then the wagon lurched forward, and Hannah watched her childhood home grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely behind a rise in the land. She did not cry. She felt too numb for tears. The journey to Silverton took 8 days. They traveled southwest through terrain that grew steadily rougher and more mountainous. Pete was not much for conversation, which suited Hannah fine. She spent the long hours watching the landscape transform around her, the flat plains giving way to foothills, then to mountains that thrust up toward the sky like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast. Snow still capped the highest peaks, though down in the valleys, wildflowers were beginning to bloom in scattered patches of color. They spent the nights camped beside the trail, and Pete proved to be a gentleman despite his rough exterior. He always made sure Hannah had her privacy and never made her feel uncomfortable. On the 5th night, as they sat beside the campfire eating beans and hardtack, he finally broke his customary silence. "You do not seem happy about this marriage," he observed, poking at the fire with a stick. Hannah stared into the flames. "Would you be happy if you were being sold to a stranger?" Pete grunted. "I suppose not, though I have heard of worse situations. Theodore Ashford is a hard man from what I have been told, but he is not cruel. He will provide well for you." "I wanted more than just provision," Hannah said softly. "I wanted love." "Love is a luxury most folks cannot afford," Pete replied. "But who knows? Maybe you will find it anyway. Stranger things have happened in these mountains." Hannah did not respond. She could not imagine finding love with a man who had purchased her like property. But she kept that thought to herself. On the 8th day, they reached the outskirts of Silverton. The town sat in a narrow valley surrounded by steep mountains, the buildings clustered together as though huddling for warmth. It was a rough place, raw and new, built on the wealth pulled from the earth by men desperate for fortune. The main street was lined with saloons, gambling halls, supply stores, and a scattering of more respectable establishments. Hannah could see the mines scarring the mountainsides, dark holes carved into the rock, with timber frames supporting the entrances. Pete did not stop in Silverton itself. "Mr. Ashford's place is another hour up the mountain," he explained. "He built his house away from town, says he likes the privacy." They took a narrow road that wound up the slope, following a creek that rushed down from the heights. The wagon wheels creaked and groaned on the steep grade. Finally, they rounded a bend and Hannah saw the house. It was larger than she had expected, built of heavy logs with a stone foundation and a wide front porch. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys, and several outbuildings were visible behind the main structure, including a large barn and what looked like a bunkhouse for workers. The setting was beautiful in a stark, wild way, surrounded by pine trees with the mountains rising up behind like sentinels. But Hannah felt no joy at the sight, only a growing sense of dread. A man emerged from the house as the wagon approached. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a fine wool suit that seemed out of place in the wilderness. His hair was dark, streaked with gray, his face strong-featured and clean-shaven. He watched the wagon with eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Theodore Ashford. Pete helped Hannah down from the wagon, and she stood on shaking legs, smoothing her travel-stained skirt with nervous hands. Theodore approached, his boots crunching on the gravel drive. He stopped a few feet away, looking her up and down with the assessing gaze of a man inspecting merchandise. "Miss Zimmerman," he said. His voice was deep, cultured, without warmth. You are shorter than I expected from your photograph." Hannah lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "And you are exactly as I expected, Mr. Ashford, a stranger." Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to name. "We will remedy that soon enough. We will be married in 4 days. I have already made the arrangements with the preacher in town. In the meantime, Mrs. Henley, my housekeeper, will show you to your room. You will find everything you need there." An older woman had emerged from the house, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face kind despite its weathered lines. She came forward and took Hannah's arm gently. "Come along, dear. You must be exhausted from your journey. Let me show you where you will stay." Hannah followed Mrs. Henley into the house, leaving Theodore to settle accounts with Pete. The interior was well appointed, with furniture that had clearly been brought in at great expense. A fire burned in the large stone fireplace, and oil lamps cast warm pools of light. It was comfortable, even luxurious by frontier standards, but it felt like a gilded cage. Mrs. Henley led her upstairs to a bedroom that overlooked the creek. "This was his first wife's room," the housekeeper said quietly. "He has prepared it for you. If you need anything at all, you just let me know. I will do my best to help you settle in." After Mrs. Henley left, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She wept for her lost freedom, for the dreams she had cherished and would never see fulfilled, for the life she had wanted and would never have. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she washed her face in the basin on the dresser and unpacked her trunk with hands that had steadied with resignation. The next morning, Hannah woke to find the house quiet except for the sounds of Mrs. Henley working in the kitchen below. She dressed carefully in one of her better dresses and went downstairs, unsure what was expected of her. Theodore was nowhere to be seen. "He left before dawn," Mrs. Henley explained, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before Hannah. "He spends most days at the mines. He will return for supper." Hannah picked at her breakfast, her appetite non-existent. "Tell me about his first wife," she said suddenly. Mrs. Henley's expression grew sad. "Margaret was a sweet girl, much like yourself. She came from Philadelphia, the daughter of one of Mr. Ashford's business associates. She was not suited for this rough life, but she tried her best. When she got with child, she was so happy, but the birth went wrong. The baby, a boy, died with her. Mr. Ashford has not been the same since. He has thrown himself into his work and closed off his heart. And now he wants a replacement," Hannah said bitterly. "He wants a chance at having an heir and a properly run household," Mrs. Henley corrected gently. "Whether he will allow himself to care for you, only time will tell. But I will say this, dear. He is not a cruel man. He will not mistreat you. He is simply a man who has forgotten how to feel." Hannah spent the day exploring the house and the immediate grounds, always aware that she was a prisoner of circumstance, no matter how comfortable the prison. The creek that ran past the property was beautiful, rushing over smooth stones with a musical sound. She found a place where a flat rock made a natural seat and sat there for a long while, watching the water and trying to imagine what her life would be like after the wedding. She could not make the picture come clear. Theodore returned as the sun was setting. Hannah heard his heavy tread on the porch, heard him speaking in low tones with someone, perhaps one of his workers. When he entered the house, she was setting the table as Mrs. Henley had asked her to do. He paused in the doorway, watching her with those unreadable dark eyes. "Good evening," he said formally. "Good evening," Hannah replied, matching his tone. They ate dinner together, an awkward meal where every attempt at conversation died quickly. Theodore asked her perfunctory questions about her journey and her comfort in the house. Hannah answered politely but offered nothing more. She was not going to make this easy for him. If he wanted a wife, he would have to work for more than her physical presence in his house. After dinner, Theodore retreated to his study with a glass of whiskey and a ledger book. Hannah helped Mrs. Henley clean up, grateful for the older woman's gentle chatter. When the work was done, she went to her room and sat by the window, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She had never felt more alone in her life. The pattern repeated itself over the next 2 days. Theodore left early, returned late, and they shared stilted meals where neither of them seemed to know what to say to the other. Hannah felt like a ghost haunting a house that would never be her home. On the third evening, however, something changed. Hannah had gone down to the creek after supper, needing to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house. The evening was mild, with the smell of pine and earth strong in the air. She sat on her favorite rock, her arms wrapped around her knees, and allowed herself to imagine running away. She could walk back to Silverton, find work somehow, make her own way. But even as the fantasy played out in her mind, she knew it was impossible. She had no money, no prospects, and her family's debt would remain unpaid if she broke the agreement. She was well and truly trapped. She was so lost in her thoughts that she did not hear the horse approach until it was quite close. She looked up, startled, and saw a rider on a rangy bay horse, silhouetted against the fading light. The man dismounted and led the horse to the creek to drink, and as he drew closer, Hannah could see him more clearly. He was younger than Theodore, probably close to her own age, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled over his collar. He wore the rough clothes of a working cowboy, chaps over denim pants, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, a bandana around his neck. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong bones and eyes that held warmth and humor even in the twilight. There was a natural grace to the way he moved, an ease in his body that spoke of a man comfortable with himself and his place in the world. He noticed Hannah and touched the brim of his hat politely. "Evening, madam. I did not mean to intrude. I am just passing through on my way to the Ashford place." Hannah stood, brushing off her skirt. "You are not intruding. I am staying at the Ashford place. I am Hannah Zimmerman." The cowboy's eyes widened slightly, and something complicated crossed his face. "You are the intended bride, then. I have heard about the upcoming wedding. I am Grant Irving. I work for Mr. Ashford, managing his cattle operation. I have been up in the high country checking on the herds and just got back." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the creek babbling between them. Grant Irving cleared his throat. "I hope you will be happy here, Miss Zimmerman. It is a beautiful place, if a bit isolated." "I do not expect to be happy," Hannah said before she could stop herself. "I expect to survive." Grant looked at her sharply, and she saw understanding dawn in his blue eyes. "It is that kind of arrangement, then. I am sorry." Hannah shrugged, trying to appear indifferent though her heart was racing. There was something about this man that called to her, something genuine and kind that she had not encountered in Theodore. "It is the way of the world. Women are traded for debts and cattle. I am learning to accept it." "You should not have to accept it," Grant said quietly. "You should be choosing your own path." "That is a luxury I cannot afford," Hannah replied. They stood looking at each other as the darkness deepened around them, and Hannah felt a pull toward this stranger that both thrilled and frightened her. She barely knew him, had just met him, but already she felt more connection to Grant Irving than she did to the man she was supposed to marry in 2 days. "I should get back," Hannah said, breaking the spell. "Mrs. Henley will worry." Grant nodded, but before she could walk past him, he spoke again. "Miss Zimmerman, if you ever need anything, a friend to talk to, someone who will listen, you can find me in the bunkhouse or out with the cattle. I know this cannot be easy for you, but you are not completely alone here." "Thank you," Hannah whispered, and then she hurried back to the house, her heart pounding in her chest. That night she could not sleep. She kept thinking about Grant Irving, about the kindness in his eyes and the gentleness in his voice. She thought about how different he was from Theodore, how alive she had felt in those few minutes by the creek. It was dangerous to think such things. She was promised to another man. In 2 days she would be married. She had no right to these feelings. But the heart does not care about rights and obligations. It wants what it wants. The next day passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations for the wedding. Mrs. Henley pressed Hannah's best dress and made sure everything was ready. Theodore remained distant, spending most of the day in his study attending to business matters. Hannah felt like she was sleepwalking through a dream, detached from everything happening around her. In the late afternoon, she slipped away from the house again, drawn back to the creek. She told herself she was just seeking solitude, but when she saw Grant Irving checking the fence line near the water, her heart leaped in a way that could not be denied. He saw her and walked over, his expression concerned. "Miss Zimmerman, you look troubled." "I am getting married tomorrow," Hannah said, and to her horror, her voice broke. "I am getting married to a man I do not know, a man who looks at me like I am a useful object, and I am expected to smile and be grateful because he is paying my family's debts." Grant removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I wish I could tell you it will be all right, but I do not know that it will be. Theodore Ashford is not a bad man, but he is not a man who knows how to love anymore. Margaret's death broke something in him." "Why do you work for him if you know what he is like?" "Because the pay is good and the work is honest," Grant said. "And because I had nowhere else to go. I have been drifting since I was 18, working ranches from Texas to Montana. I figured I would stay here for a season or two, save up some money, then move on. But now—" He trailed off, looking at Hannah with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Now I find myself not wanting to leave, not if it means leaving you behind with no ally in this place." "You cannot say things like that," Hannah whispered. "I am another man's intended." "I know," Grant said roughly, "and I have no right to feel what I am feeling, but I cannot help it, Miss Zimmerman. From the moment I saw you by the creek, something in me just knew. I know that makes no sense. I know I sound like a fool, but I cannot let you marry him without telling you the truth. Let me prove I am worth choosing. Give me a chance to show you what your life could be if you chose differently." Hannah's mind reeled. "What are you suggesting? That I run away with you? I cannot do that. My family's debt, my father would be ruined and I would be disgraced. We would be hunted down. Theodore would make sure of it." "I am not suggesting anything right now," Grant said, though the fire in his eyes said otherwise. "I am just telling you that there is another option. That you do not have to resign yourself to a loveless marriage if you do not want to. That there is a man standing right here who would count himself the luckiest person alive if you would give him a chance to earn your affection honestly." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this to me? Why could you not have just stayed away and let me go through with this without knowing there was another choice?" Grant stepped closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell the scent of leather and sage and honest sweat. "Because you deserve to know that you are worth more than a financial transaction. You deserve to be seen, Hannah, really seen. And I see you." They stood frozen, separated by inches and an impossible gulf of circumstance. Hannah wanted to close the distance, wanted to feel his arms around her, wanted to know what it would be like to be held by a man who actually wanted her for herself. But she could not move. Fear and duty held her paralyzed. Finally, Grant stepped back, putting safe distance between them. "I am sorry. I should not have spoken, but I cannot regret telling you the truth. Tomorrow you will marry Theodore Ashford and I will stand in the back of the church and watch it happen. But if you change your mind before then, if you decide you want a different life, you know where to find me." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Hannah standing alone by the creek with her heart in pieces. That night, Hannah barely touched her dinner. Theodore noticed and asked if she was feeling ill. She told him she was just nervous about the wedding, which was not entirely a lie. After the meal, she retreated to her room and sat at the window, staring out into the darkness. What Grant had said kept echoing in her mind. "Let me prove I am worth choosing." The words stirred something in her that had been dormant, something that rebelled against the passive acceptance of her fate. All her life, things had been decided for her. Her father had chosen this path, had sold her future to pay his debts. Theodore had chosen her from a photograph like selecting goods from a catalog. She had never been asked what she wanted. But what did she want? The question terrified her because she knew the answer. She wanted Grant Irving. She wanted the warmth she had seen in his eyes, the passion in his voice, the promise of being truly cherished. She wanted to choose her own destiny, even if that choice led to hardship. She wanted to feel alive instead of buried, but the cost was so high. Her family's ruin. Her own reputation destroyed. A life on the run, always looking over their shoulders. Could she really ask Grant to take on that burden? Could she really be that selfish? Hannah did not sleep that night. She watched the stars wheel across the sky and listened to the sound of the creek and wrestled with the biggest decision of her life. By the time dawn painted the sky pink and gold, she had made up her mind. She dressed carefully in her nightgown and wrapper, then slipped out of her room. The house was still quiet. She crept down the stairs and out the front door, the morning air cool against her flushed cheeks. The bunkhouse was a small structure behind the barn. Hannah had never been inside, had never had reason to go there. But she went now, her bare feet silent on the dew-wet grass. She knocked softly on the door. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of movement inside. The door opened, and Grant stood there, shirtless and tousled from sleep, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Hannah." "I choose you," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "If your offer was genuine, if you meant what you said, then I choose you. Help me get away from here. Help me choose my own life." Grant stared at her for a long moment, and she saw a dozen emotions cross his face, hope and fear and fierce joy. Then he reached out and took her hand, pulling her inside and closing the door behind her. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. "Once we do this, there is no going back. Theodore will come after us. Your family will suffer. We will have to leave Colorado, start over somewhere new with nothing but what we can carry. It will not be easy, Hannah." "I do not care," Hannah said, and she realized she meant it. "I would rather have a hard life with you than a comfortable prison with him. I would rather be poor and free than wealthy and trapped. I choose you, Grant Irving. I choose you." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest, and Hannah felt like she had finally come home. She could hear his heart pounding, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. When he pulled back to look down at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Then we leave now," he said. "Before the house wakes up, we will take my horse and as many supplies as I can gather quickly. We will head north toward Wyoming. I have friends there who will help us. We will find a preacher and get married proper as soon as we can. I will spend every day of my life proving that you made the right choice." They moved quickly after that. Hannah ran back to the house and dressed in her most practical clothing, sturdy wool skirt and a simple blouse, her warmest jacket. She grabbed what few possessions she could carry, including the little money she had saved over the years, hidden in the bottom of her trunk. She took one last look at the room that would never be hers, then slipped back out into the dawn. Grant had saddled his horse, and a second one from Theodore's stable, a sturdy mare that could handle the mountain trails. He had packed bedrolls and supplies, moved with the efficient speed of a man who knew how to travel light and fast. When Hannah appeared, he helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "Ready?" he asked. Hannah looked back at the house one last time. She thought about Theodore, about how angry he would be when he discovered her gone. She thought about her parents, about the shame and financial ruin this would bring them. She thought about all the reasonable, responsible things she should do. Then she looked at Grant, at the man who had offered her a choice, who saw her as more than a transaction, who was willing to risk everything to give her a chance at happiness. She thought about waking up beside him every morning for the rest of her life, about building something real and true together, about choosing love over duty. "I am ready," she said. They rode out as the sun cleared the mountains, pushing the horses hard up the trail that led north. Behind them, Hannah imagined Mrs. Henley discovering her empty room, Theodore's cold fury when he realized his bride had fled. She felt a pang of guilt, sharp and deep, but she did not look back. They rode for hours, stopping only to rest the horses and share jerky and water from Grant's canteen. The mountain trail was rough, winding through forests of pine and aspen, crossing streams swollen with snowmelt. Grant kept them moving at a punishing pace, knowing that Theodore would send men after them as soon as he discovered their flight. It was mid-afternoon when they heard the sound of hoofbeats behind them. Grant cursed under his breath and urged his horse faster. "There is a canyon up ahead with places to hide. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them in the rocks." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest as they raced toward the canyon, the horses straining with effort. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. She could hear men shouting, could hear Theodore's voice among them, commanding his men to overtake the fugitives. They plunged into the canyon, a narrow defile with towering rock walls on either side. Grant led them off the main trail onto a smaller path that wound between massive boulders. They dismounted and led the horses deeper into the maze of rock, finding a place where an overhang created a shallow cave. They pulled the horses into the shadow and waited, hardly daring to breathe. The sounds of the pursuing riders echoed off the canyon walls. Hannah could hear Theodore clearly now, his voice sharp with anger. "They came this way. Search every inch of this canyon. I want them found before nightfall." Grant put his arm around Hannah, holding her close. She could feel him trembling, whether from exertion or fear or both, she could not tell. They stayed frozen in their hiding place as the searchers spread out through the canyon, their voices bouncing off the rocks in confusing patterns. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Hannah's legs cramped from holding still. One of the horses shifted restlessly, and Grant stroked its neck, whispering wordless comfort. The sun moved across the sky, and gradually the sounds of the search grew more distant. The searchers were moving deeper into the canyon, away from their hiding spot. Finally, as the shadows lengthened and the air grew cool, Grant risked a whispered conversation. "They will keep looking until dark, then make camp and start again at first light. We need to backtrack, head west into the rougher country where they will not expect us to go. It will be harder going, but it is our best chance." "Whatever you think is best," Hannah whispered back. "I trust you." They waited until full darkness had fallen, then led the horses carefully back the way they had come. The night was moonless, making the going treacherous, but it also provided cover. They moved slowly, feeling their way more than seeing, trusting the horses to find safe footing. Behind them, they could see the glow of campfires where Theodore's men had stopped for the night. They traveled through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers. When dawn came, they were in wild country, rocky and heavily forested, with no clear trails. Grant found a place where a spring bubbled up among the rocks, creating a small pool surrounded by thick underbrush. They made camp there, too exhausted to go any farther. "We will rest today and travel again tonight," Grant said. "It is slower but safer. In a few days, we should be able to reach the main road north. Once we are in Wyoming territory, Theodore's reach will not extend as far." Hannah nodded, too tired to speak. Grant spread out the bedrolls and made sure she was comfortable, then sat nearby, keeping watch. Despite her exhaustion, Hannah could not sleep immediately. The reality of what she had done was settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had destroyed her family's hopes of escaping debt. She had made Theodore Ashford look like a fool. She was a runaway, living rough in the mountains with a man she barely knew. And yet, when she looked at Grant sitting alert and watchful, protecting her even at cost to his own rest, she felt no regret. Only a strange sense of rightness, as though all the tangled threads of her life had finally aligned in the correct pattern. "Grant," she said softly. He turned to look at her, his face gentle. "Yes, thank you for giving me a choice, for seeing me." He moved closer, taking her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, his grip strong and warm. "Hannah, I want you to understand something. I am not a wealthy man. I do not own land or mines. I cannot give you a fine house or fancy dresses. What I can give you is my whole heart, freely given, with no strings or conditions. I can promise you that I will work hard to provide for us, that I will treat you with respect and tenderness, that I will never make you feel like you are anything less than precious to me. That is all I have to offer. I pray it is enough." Hannah felt tears welling up, but they were not tears of sadness. "It is everything," she said. "It is everything I ever wanted." Grant leaned forward and kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that held all the promise of their future together. It was Hannah's first real kiss, and it felt like coming alive, like waking from a long sleep. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Rest now," Grant said. "I will keep watch. You are safe with me." Hannah lay back on the bedroll and closed her eyes, and despite everything, despite the uncertainty and danger, she fell into a deep and peaceful sleep. They traveled by night for 3 more days, a slow and exhausting journey through the wilderness. Grant proved to be an expert woodsman, finding water and game, navigating by the stars, keeping them moving steadily north and west. They saw no further sign of Theodore's men, though Grant remained cautious. On the 4th day, they reached a rutted road that Grant said would take them toward the Wyoming border. "We can travel by day now," he said, "but we should still be careful. Theodore might have sent word ahead to the towns, offering a reward for our capture." They pressed on, following the road through increasingly rough country. On the evening of the 5th day since their flight, they came to a tiny settlement, barely more than a trading post and a few scattered cabins. Grant went in to buy supplies while Hannah waited with the horses, her face shadowed by a bonnet. When Grant emerged, he had a strange look on his face. "There is a circuit preacher staying here tonight," he said. "He is heading south tomorrow. If we want to be married proper, this is our chance. He says he will perform the ceremony tonight if we are willing." Hannah's heart skipped. "Tonight? So soon?" "I know it is not the wedding you might have imagined," Grant said quietly. "No church, no family, no fancy dress, just you and me and a preacher in a trading post. But it would make us legal husband and wife. No one could say we were living in sin. No one could try to separate us on those grounds. We would be bound together in the eyes of God and the law." Hannah looked into his eyes and saw the question there, the hope mixed with uncertainty. In that moment, she realized that despite everything they had been through together, he still was not sure of her. He still thought she might change her mind, might regret her choice. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Yes," she said firmly. Yes, I will marry you tonight. I will marry you right now. I do not need a fancy wedding or a church or any of that. I just need you." The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted by an elderly preacher with kind eyes and a weathered Bible. The owner of the trading post and his wife served as witnesses. Hannah wore her dusty traveling clothes. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. But when Grant slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had bought with nearly the last of his money, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Hannah felt a joy so profound it took her breath away. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a smile. Grant pulled Hannah into his arms and kissed her deeply, and she kissed him back with all the love and gratitude and hope in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both of them were flushed and grinning like fools. They spent their wedding night in a tiny room above the trading post, the only privacy available. It was nothing like the wedding night Hannah had been raised to expect. The room was bare and rough, the bed narrow and lumpy. But when Grant took her in his arms, when he loved her with a tenderness and passion that made her feel cherished beyond measure, Hannah thought it was the most perfect night of her life. Afterward, they lay entwined in the darkness, listening to the wind in the pines outside. Grant traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, his touch gentle and reverent. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "I am happier than I ever thought possible. I was so afraid when I left my family, so uncertain. But lying here with you, being your wife, I know I made the right choice. I know this is where I belong. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it," Grant promised, kissing her forehead. "We will build a good life together, Hannah. It might take time, and it will not always be easy, but we will do it together." They continued north over the next week, traveling more openly now that they were legally married and had crossed into Wyoming territory. The landscape changed around them, the steep mountains giving way to rolling foothills and eventually to open plains. They reached the small town of Rawlins, Wyoming, in early May, and it was there that Grant used the last of their resources to send 2 telegrams. The first was to Theodore Ashford, brief and to the point. "Miss Zimmerman and I are legally married. Your debt arrangement with her father is void. We will not be returning. Leave us in peace. Grant Irving." The second telegram was longer, addressed to Hannah's parents. In it, Hannah explained what she had done and why. She apologized for the hardship her choice would cause them, but made it clear that she did not regret her decision. She told them about Grant, about their marriage, about her hope for the future. She promised to write again when they were more settled, and she asked for their forgiveness and understanding, though she knew she might never receive it. After sending the telegrams, Grant and Hannah spent their last few coins on a cheap meal at a boarding house. They sat across from each other at a scarred wooden table, eating stew and bread, and contemplated their situation. "We are nearly broke," Grant said matter-of-factly, "but I am a good hand with cattle and horses. I can find work on one of the ranches around here. It might take a while to save up enough to start our own place, but we will get there eventually." "I can work too," Hannah said. "I can cook and clean, take in laundry, whatever it takes. We will make it work, Grant. I am not afraid of hard work." Grant reached across the table and took her hand. "I know you are not. You are the bravest person I have ever met. You gave up everything for a chance at a better life. I will not let you down." Over the next few weeks, Grant found work on a large cattle ranch about 20 miles outside of Rawlins. The foreman, a gruff but fair man named Bill Cooper, hired him on the spot after seeing him work with the horses. The ranch provided a small cabin for married hands, a single room with a wood stove and not much else, but it was shelter and it was theirs. Hannah set about making the cabin into a home. She scrubbed the floors and walls, sewed curtains from cheap fabric bought in town, planted a small garden in the plot of land behind the cabin. She took in laundry from some of the single ranch hands and did mending for extra money. The work was hard and endless, but she did it with a cheerful spirit because she was doing it for their future, for the life they were building together. In the evenings, after Grant came in from a long day working cattle, they would sit together on the narrow porch of their cabin and watch the sun set over the plains. Grant would tell her about his day, about the ornery bull that nearly trampled him or the new colt that showed promise. Hannah would share the small triumphs and frustrations of her own work. They would talk and laugh and dream about the day when they would have their own land, their own herd, their own place in the world. One evening in late June, as they sat watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Hannah took Grant's hand and placed it on her stomach. "There is something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of joy and nervousness. Grant looked at her, his eyes questioning. Then understanding dawned and his face lit up with wonder. "A baby, we are going to have a baby," Hannah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I think so, I am almost certain. Are you happy?" Grant swept her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Happy?" "Hannah, I am overcome. I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can hardly stand it. We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family." They held each other as the night deepened around them, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. The future that had seemed so uncertain just a few months ago now stretched before them, filled with purpose and hope. The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and as summer gave way to fall, she grew increasingly large and uncomfortable. But she never complained. Grant was endlessly attentive, taking on extra work to pay for the doctor's visits, making sure she had good food and plenty of rest. The other ranch families were kind, the women especially, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offering their support. In January of 1884, on a bitterly cold night with snow piling up outside their cabin, Hannah went into labor. Grant rode through the storm to fetch the doctor and one of the experienced ranch wives, a woman named Sarah who had delivered countless babies. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Grant paced outside in the freezing cold, wild with worry, until finally he heard the thin wail of a newborn. Sarah opened the door, her face exhausted but smiling. "You have a son, Grant, a big, healthy boy. And your wife is tired but doing fine. Come meet your son." Grant stumbled into the cabin on shaking legs. Hannah lay in their bed, pale and drenched with sweat but radiantly happy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Grant knelt beside the bed, looking down at the baby with awe. "He is perfect," Grant whispered. "Hannah, he is absolutely perfect." "You want to hold him?" Hannah asked. Grant carefully took the baby, cradling him against his chest. The infant had a shock of dark hair and was already strong, his little fists waving in the air. Grant felt something shift in his chest, a love so fierce and protective it almost hurt. This was his son, his and Hannah's. A child born of the choice they had made, the love they had fought for. "What should we name him?" Hannah asked. They had discussed names during the long months of waiting, but now that the baby was here, none of the names they had considered seemed quite right. Grant looked down at his son, then at Hannah, then back at the baby. "Samuel," he said finally. "Samuel Irving, it means asked of God. Because he is the answer to prayers I did not even know I was praying." Hannah smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Samuel, I love it. Welcome to the world, Samuel Irving. You are so loved, little one, so very loved." The months after Samuel's birth were the hardest and happiest of Hannah's life. The baby was demanding, waking every few hours to nurse, crying when he was tired or uncomfortable or just wanted to be held. Hannah was constantly exhausted, her body still recovering from the birth, her days blurring together in a haze of feeding and changing and rocking and soothing. But every time she looked at her son's face, every time Grant came home and lit up at the sight of them, every time the three of them were together as a family, she felt a contentment she had never known was possible. Grant was a devoted father. He would sit for hours with Samuel in his arms, talking to him in a low, gentle voice, telling him stories about the ranch and the cattle and the wide world he would grow up to explore. On his days off, he would take Hannah and the baby into Rawlins so Hannah could visit with the other women in town and feel less isolated. He was saving every spare penny, planning for the day when they could afford to buy their own land. That day came sooner than they expected. In the spring of 1885, Bill Cooper called Grant into his office and made him an offer. Bill was getting older and wanted to retire. He had no children of his own to pass the ranch to, and he had been impressed with Grant's work ethic and integrity. He proposed that Grant buy a portion of the ranch, 1,000 acres of good grazing land with water rights and a sturdy house, on terms that Grant could afford. It would take years to pay off, but it would be theirs. Grant could barely contain his excitement when he told Hannah, "It is everything we have been working for, our own land. A real house for you and Samuel, room for our herd to grow. We can build something lasting, Hannah, something to pass down to Samuel and any other children we might have. What do you think?" Hannah threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "I think yes. I think absolutely yes. Let us do this, Grant. Let us build our future." They signed the papers in May of 1885, and suddenly they were landowners, ranchers in their own right. The house was much larger than their cabin, with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen and a parlor with a stone fireplace. Hannah walked through the rooms in a daze, hardly able to believe this was really theirs. Over the next few years, they worked harder than they ever had before. Grant built up their herd, buying cattle when he could, carefully managing their resources. Hannah kept the house, raised Samuel, and helped with the ranch work when needed. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle, to brand calves, to mend fences. She was up before dawn and did not stop until long after dark. It was exhausting work, but it was their work, their land, their future they were building. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic little boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes. He followed Grant everywhere, wanting to help with everything, already showing signs of becoming a natural horseman. Hannah watched him grow with a bittersweet mixture of pride and nostalgia, marveling at how quickly time passed. In the summer of 1887, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued working almost until her due date, ignoring Grant's worried protests that she should rest more. In early February of 1888, she gave birth to a daughter, a small, delicate baby with blonde hair and blue eyes. They named her Rose, and Samuel, now 3 years old, was instantly smitten with his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help care for her at every opportunity. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They added on to the house, building a larger kitchen and a proper dining room. They bought better breeding stock for their cattle. They hired a couple of hands to help with the work, young men who reminded Hannah of Grant when he had been a cowboy working for Theodore Ashford. That life seemed like a distant dream now, something that had happened to a different person. In the spring of 1890, a letter arrived that brought the past rushing back. It was from Hannah's mother, the first communication they had received from her family in all the years since Hannah had fled her arranged marriage. Hannah's hands shook as she opened it. Her mother wrote that Hannah's father had died the previous fall. His debts had eventually been settled through the sale of the farm, and Clara had gone to live with Hannah's brother in Kansas City. The letter was carefully worded, not quite an apology, but not condemnation either. Clara wrote that she had spent years angry at Hannah for what she had done, for the shame and financial hardship it had caused. But time and grief had softened her heart. She wrote that she understood, finally, why Hannah had made the choice she did. She wrote that she had found copies of the letters Theodore Ashford had sent, seen the cold, transactional nature of his correspondence, and realized what kind of marriage she had been pushing her daughter into. "I hope you will forgive me," Clara wrote. "I hope you have found happiness in the life you chose. I would dearly love to meet my grandchildren, if you would permit it. I am an old woman now, and I do not know how many years I have left. I would like to spend them knowing that my daughter is well and that the rift between us has been healed." Hannah read the letter aloud to Grant that evening after the children were in bed. When she finished, she was crying. Grant pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. "I want to see her," Hannah said. "I want her to meet Samuel and Rose. I want her to see that I am happy, that I made the right choice. Is that foolish of me?" "It is not foolish at all," Grant said. "She is your mother. Family matters, even when it is complicated. We will arrange for her to come visit if she is able to travel. Or we can go to Kansas City if that is easier. Whatever you want, Hannah. I will support you." They arranged for Clara to come to Wyoming that summer. Hannah was nervous in the days leading up to her mother's arrival, afraid that old wounds would reopen, that the visit would be awkward and painful. But when the stage pulled up and Clara stepped down, older and frailer than Hannah remembered, all the hurt and anger melted away. They embraced on the dusty street in Rawlins, both of them crying, and in that moment, the past was truly forgiven. Clara spent 2 weeks at the ranch, and it was a healing time for everyone. She fell in love with her grandchildren, spoiling them shamelessly. She and Hannah talked for hours, filling in the years they had missed, finally able to be honest with each other. Clara confessed how much she regretted the arranged marriage, how trapped she had felt by their circumstances, how proud she was of Hannah's courage to choose differently. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara said to Grant, "I want to thank you for seeing my daughter's worth, for giving her a choice, for building this beautiful life with her. I could not have asked for a better man to be her husband." Grant took Hannah's hand and smiled. "I am the one who should be thanking you, madam. Without you, Hannah would never have existed, and my life would be empty without her." After Clara returned to Kansas City, Hannah felt a sense of peace she had not realized she was missing. The last broken piece of her past had been mended. She was free to fully embrace the life she had built without the shadow of guilt hanging over her. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children growing up. Samuel grew tall and strong, his father's son in every way, taking on more and more responsibility on the ranch. Rose was quieter but no less determined, with a gift for working with horses that amazed everyone. In 1893, Hannah gave birth to another son whom they named Thomas. And in 1896, their last child was born, a daughter they called Lily. Grant and Hannah watched their family grow with gratitude and joy. The ranch continued to prosper. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that was built on their own hard work and determination. They had respect in the community, friends who valued them, and most importantly, they had each other. On warm summer evenings, Grant and Hannah would sometimes slip away from the busy household and walk down to the creek that ran through their property. They would sit on a flat rock, just as they had done years ago in a different place and time, and watch the water flow past. You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had married Theodore Ashford? Grant asked one such evening, many years into their marriage. Hannah leaned against him, comfortable and content. Sometimes. I think I would have been materially comfortable but spiritually dead. I would have had a big house and fine things, but I would have been alone in all the ways that matter. I would have survived, but I would not have lived. No regrets then? Grant asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Not a single one, Hannah said firmly. Choosing you was the best decision I ever made. This life, our children, everything we have built together, it is worth more than all the silver in those Colorado mountains. You gave me the freedom to choose, and I chose love. I chose you, and I would make that same choice 1,000 times over. Grant pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss that held decades of love and partnership and shared struggle and triumph. They sat together as the sun set and the stars emerged, two people who had fought for the right to be together and had won everything that mattered. As the new century dawned, Grant and Hannah Irving looked toward the future with confidence. Their children were growing into fine adults, ready to make their own way in the world. Samuel had already taken over much of the ranch management and was courting a sweet young woman from town. Rose had announced her intention to become a teacher and was saving money to attend normal school. Thomas and Lily were still young, full of energy and possibility. Hannah and Grant themselves were in their 40s now, no longer the young people who had fled into the mountains all those years ago. They had gray in their hair and lines on their faces earned by years of sun and wind and hard work. But they were still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word, still grateful every day for the choice they had made. One evening in the spring of 1901, as they celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary, Grant presented Hannah with a gift. It was a locket on a delicate gold chain. Inside was a tiny photograph of them on their wedding day, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Rawlins not long after they were married. They looked impossibly young in the picture, their faces full of hope and determination. "I want you to have this," Grant said as he fastened the chain around her neck. "So you always remember where we started, two people with nothing but love and courage. Look how far we have come, Hannah. Look at everything we have built." Hannah touched the locket, feeling the warmth of the metal against her skin. "We have built a good life, a beautiful life. And it all started with you saying those words that day by the creek. Let me prove I am worth choosing. You have proven it every single day since then." Grant Irving. Every single day. They held each other close, two people who had dared to choose love over duty, freedom over security, each other over everything else. They had paid the price for that choice and had found it worthwhile beyond measure. As the years continued to unfold, their family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel married his sweetheart and built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, staying close to help with the family business. Rose completed her education and became a beloved teacher in Rawlins, shaping young minds with the same determination her mother had shown in building her life. Thomas followed his father's footsteps into ranching, developing an innovative approach to cattle breeding that earned the family ranch even greater respect. Lily, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for writing, eventually moving to Denver to work for a newspaper. Grandchildren arrived in due course, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Grant and Hannah delighted in their role as grandparents, spoiling the little ones just as Clara had spoiled their children years before. They told the grandchildren stories of the old days, of the wild times when Wyoming was still rough frontier country, of how their grandmother had once been promised to a stranger, but had chosen to run away with their grandfather instead. The children listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the romance and adventure of it all. But Grant and Hannah always made sure to emphasize the serious parts too: the hard work and sacrifice, the years of struggle, the price of choosing your own path. They wanted the next generation to understand that freedom was not free, that love required courage, that building something worthwhile took time and dedication. In 1915, on a crisp autumn day when the leaves were turning gold and red, Grant and Hannah celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, their children grown and mostly gone from the house, though Samuel and his family lived close enough to visit often. The ranch was stable and successful, their legacy secure. They sat together on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air, watching the sun set over land that was well and truly theirs. Grant took Hannah's hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day I first saw you by the creek, about how scared I was to speak up to offer you a choice. I almost did not say anything. I almost let you go through with that wedding. Can you imagine? Our whole life together almost never happened because I was afraid." Hannah squeezed his hand. "But you did speak up. You were brave when it mattered most. You gave me the gift of choice and I chose you. And every day since then, I have continued to choose you. That is what love is, Grant. Not just one big choice, but 1,000 small choices, made every day to keep choosing each other." "I will keep choosing you until my last breath," Grant said softly. "And if there is anything beyond this life, I will choose you there too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, two people who had built an entire world together from nothing but love and courage and determination. They had faced hardship and triumph, struggle and joy, loss and gain. Through it all, they had held onto each other and never let go. As the years advanced into the 1920s, age began to slow them both down. Grant's knees ached from decades of ranch work, and Hannah's hands grew stiff with arthritis. But they remained active, still involved in the ranch operations, though Samuel had officially taken over management. They remained deeply connected to their children and grandchildren, the center of a large and loving family that gathered often for holidays and celebrations. In the summer of 1923, they received word that Theodore Ashford had died. The news came in a letter from an old acquaintance in Colorado. Theodore had lived another 40 years after Hannah fled, had eventually remarried, though the marriage had been cold and childless. He had grown his mining empire, had become wealthy beyond imagining, had died alone in his mountain mansion with only hired servants for company. Hannah felt a complicated mixture of emotions when she learned of his death. Pity, certainly. Relief that he could no longer harbor any lingering resentment toward her and Grant, and gratitude that she had escaped the fate he had planned for her. "I hope he found some measure of peace at the end," she said to Grant. "I hope he was not bitter all those years." "That is kind of you," Grant said. "After everything, you can still wish him well. You have a generous heart, Hannah Irving." "Life is too short for bitterness," Hannah replied. "We made our choice, he made his. We all lived with the consequences. I hope wherever he is now, he has found what he was looking for." The decades continued their steady march. The 20th century brought changes that would have been unimaginable in the wild frontier days of their youth. Automobiles appeared on the roads, replacing horses for everyday travel. Electricity came to the ranch, bringing light at the flip of a switch instead of the flicker of oil lamps. Telephones connected them to the wider world in ways they never could have anticipated. Through it all, Grant and Hannah adapted and endured. They embraced some changes and resisted others, always staying true to the core values that had guided their life together: hard work, integrity, family, and love. In 1933, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone that seemed almost miraculous. The entire family gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. There was food and music and dancing and storytelling late into the night. At one point, Hannah found herself standing on the porch, watching the party unfold before her. She was 71 years old now, her hair white, her face deeply lined. But her eyes still held the same fierce spirit that had led her to run away all those decades ago. Grant came and stood beside her, moving slowly with the aid of a cane. He was 72, his dark hair long since gone to silver, his strong frame bent slightly with age. But when he looked at Hannah, his eyes still held the same love and wonder they had held at the beginning. 50 years, he said, shaking his head. Half a century. When I first saw you by that creek, I never imagined we would make it this far. I never imagined all of this. He gestured to the crowd of family members celebrating inside and around the house. I knew, Hannah said, surprising him. The moment I looked into your eyes and you told me I was worth choosing, I knew we would build something lasting. I knew you were a man who kept his promises. And you have, Grant. You have proven every single day that I was worth choosing, and I hope I have proven to you that you were worth choosing too. More than worth it, Grant said, pulling her close. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Hannah. Everything good in my life flows from you. They stood together watching their family, the legacy of their love, and felt a profound sense of completion. They had lived full lives, rich lives, lives built on the foundation of that one brave choice so many years ago. As the 1930s progressed, they both began to slow down significantly. Grant's health, robust for so long, began to fail. He suffered a stroke in the winter of 1936 that left him weakened and confined mostly to the house. Hannah nursed him with the same tender devotion she had shown throughout their marriage, refusing to let anyone else take over his care. Samuel and the others urged her to let them help more, worried about the strain on her own failing health. But Hannah was adamant. I chose this man 53 years ago, she told them. I promised to love him in sickness and in health. I will not abandon him now when he needs me most. Grant, for his part, hated being dependent but was grateful beyond words for Hannah's care. On his better days, they would sit together in the parlor, looking through old photographs and reminiscing about their life together. They would talk about the early days, about their flight through the mountains, about the little cabin where they had started their married life. They would marvel at how young they had been, how brave and foolish and gloriously determined. In the early spring of 1938, Grant took a turn for the worse. The doctor came and went, leaving medicines that provided little relief. Hannah knew, with the intuition born of decades of partnership, that he was leaving her. She sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him softly, making sure he knew he was not alone. Their children and many of their grandchildren gathered, filling the house with quiet voices and suppressed tears. Everyone knew the end was near. On a soft April evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color outside the window, Grant opened his eyes and looked directly at Hannah. His gaze was clear for the first time in days. Hannah, he whispered, his voice weak but full of emotion. My Hannah, thank you for choosing me, thank you for this beautiful life. I have loved you every moment of every day. I will love you beyond death itself. Hannah, tears streaming down her face, leaned close and kissed him gently. And I have loved you, Grant Irving. You gave me freedom and choice and more happiness than I ever dreamed possible. You proved every single day that you were worth choosing. Every single day. Until we meet again, Grant whispered, and then his eyes closed for the last time. His hand went slack in Hannah's grip, and he was gone. The grief was crushing. Hannah, who had always been so strong, so resilient, was devastated by the loss. She had been with Grant for more than 55 years, more than 3/4 of her life. She did not know how to exist without him, but she had her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. They surrounded her with love, holding her up when she could not stand on her own. And slowly, painfully, she learned to live with the grief, to carry it without being crushed by it. She remained in the house they had built together, surrounded by memories. She would sit on the porch where they had spent so many evenings together, watching the sunset and talking to Grant as though he were still there. She would tell him about the grandchildren's latest achievements, about the ranch business, about all the small details of life he would want to know. Hannah lived 3 more years after Grant's passing. She remained mentally sharp and emotionally present, though her body continued to fail. She made sure all her affairs were in order, distributed keepsakes and mementos to family members, told stories so the next generations would know their history. In the summer of 1941, Hannah grew seriously ill with pneumonia. The doctors said there was little they could do. Her body, worn out by 80 years of living and 3 years of grieving, simply did not have the strength to fight. She died on a warm July morning, surrounded by family, with the windows open to let in the breeze that smelled of grass and wildflowers. Her last words were, "Grant, I am coming home to you." The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Wyoming and beyond to pay their respects. Hannah and Grant Irving were legends in their community, symbols of the pioneer spirit and enduring love. They had built something lasting, not just in land and cattle but in family and legacy. They were buried side by side in the cemetery in Rawlins, their headstones simple but eloquent. Grant Irving, 1861–1938. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he proved he was worth choosing. Hannah Zimmerman Irving, 1862–1941. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she chose love. The ranch continued to operate under Samuel's management and eventually passed to his children. The Irving family remained prominent in Wyoming ranching circles for generations. But more than their material legacy, Grant and Hannah left behind something more precious. A story of courage and choice, of 2 people who dared to claim their own destiny in a time when such choices were dangerous and rare. Their great-grandchildren and beyond would grow up hearing the story of how their great-great-grandmother was promised to a stranger in the mountains, and how a cowboy said, "Let me prove I am worth choosing," and how they ran away together to build a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It was a story of the Wild West, of hardship and triumph, of sacrifice and reward. But mostly, it was a story of love, pure and simple and true. The kind of love that shapes generations, that echoes down through the years, that reminds everyone who hears it that the most important choices we make are the ones we make with our hearts. And so the story of Grant and Hannah Irving became part of the fabric of their family's history, told and retold, embellished and preserved. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love over duty, freedom over security, and that when you find someone willing to prove they are worth choosing, you hold on to them with everything you have and never let go. The end of their mortal story was not really an ending at all, but a transformation into legend and memory and inspiration. They lived on in the stories told around dinner tables, in the values passed down through generations, in the land they had cultivated and loved, and most of all, in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by their remarkable love story. From that fateful day by the creek in the Colorado mountains to the quiet final moments surrounded by family, Grant and Hannah Irving had lived a love story for the ages. They had proven that the most precious things in life are not given or inherited but chosen and fought for. They had shown that true love is not about perfection but about commitment, not about ease but about perseverance, not about possession but about partnership. And in the end, when all was said and done, they had given the greatest gift possible to their descendants, the example of what it means to truly love, to truly choose, and to build a life of meaning and purpose together. Their story was complete, their legacy secure, their love eternal. Hannah Zimmerman had been promised to a stranger in the mountains. A cowboy named Grant Irving had said, "Let me prove I am worth choosing." And together, they had proven that love, real love, freely chosen and fiercely protected, could overcome any obstacle and last beyond death itself. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth celebrating for all the generations to come.